Well, I learned that your money will work harder than you. You know, a lot of people try to work to make money, but you should let money work for you.
Before he was moving tons of cocaine across the US and making up to $3 million on a good day before a corrupt LA, the sheriff's task force was named after him. Freeway Rick Ross was just Ricky Donald Ross, a small kid from South Central L.A., dreaming of a way out. But it wasn't drug dealing he first turned to. What is Ricky's story? And how did he reinvent himself? So, stick around till the end to learn about the rise and fall of Freeway Rick Ross. Ricky was born on January 26, 1960, in Troop, Texas. In 1963, he moved to Los Angeles with his mother, Annie Mae Malden, who came from a sharecropping background. His father, Sonny Ross, was an ex-Army cook and pig farmer. Ross and his mom settled on 87th Place near Interstate 110, which may be where his nickname Freeway comes from. Growing up in poverty, Ross was always hustling to make money from a young age. He mowed lawns, sold lemonade, and pumped gas for neighbors. But there were also signs of trouble as he shoplifted, ran errands for pimps in his area, and got into fights at school. Eventually, Ross discovered he had a tennis talent. In high school, he was good enough to catch the eye of a recruiter from Cal State Long Beach. But according to Vice, his hopes for a tennis scholarship faded when the coaches found out he still couldn't read. Despite coming close to failing his classes multiple times because of his illiteracy, Ross later said that his high school coach helped keep him in school. However, Ross eventually dropped out before graduating, and a different kind of education was about to begin. He did manage to get into Los Angeles Trade Technical College, but only for a short amount of time. And that's where he first got himself involved in illegal activities, starting with lowriding. He bought one of those cars with the flashy wheels that make it bounce up and down, but he quickly learned that these cars were magnets for police attention. Cops would do U-turns just to pull him over if they saw his car. Even though he kept lowriding for a while, he realized those cars brought nothing but trouble with the law. So when he started selling drugs, he knew he didn't want that same kind of attention, since lowriding was all about showing off and drawing attention. But now, his focus had shifted. He didn't care about attention anymore. He just wanted to make money. But hey, if you share similar ambitions, be sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon to stay updated with our latest releases so you can learn from the amazing stories of the Titans. Later, Rick got involved with a group of auto thieves called the Freeway Boys and became part owner of a chop shop dealing in stolen cars. In 1982, he saw cocaine for the first time in South Central L.A. Back then, drugs like black tar heroin, marijuana, and PCP were more common in low-income areas, but Ross started selling cocaine. After some early success, he met Henry Corrales, a Nicaraguan who supplied him with larger amounts of the drug. Ross and his crew began cooking it into crack cocaine, a more addictive and cheaper variant. By 1983, Ross had turned crack cocaine into the dominant drug in Los Angeles, and his operation was making millions as the city's main distributor. He was making about $1 million every day, with some days bringing in as much as $3 million. On the days in between, he might pull in $2 million, $2.2 million, or sometimes $1.2 million or $1.5 million. By 1984, he expanded his network, teaming up with Nicaraguan trafficker Oscar Danilo Blandon Reyes and major Colombian drug cartels. His business grew to include hundreds of low-level dealers and spread to cities like Seattle, New York, and Miami, all while he invested his profits in legitimate businesses like the Freeway Motor Inn. Interestingly, Ross never used drugs himself. Ross first caught the attention of the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department in 1985, but they couldn't make any solid charges. 2 years later, the Sheriff's Department teamed up with the LA Police Department to create the Freeway Ricky Task Force, according to the U.S. Department of Justice Office and the Inspector General. In April 1987, some members of this task force tried to set him up. After Ross managed to evade a police foot chase, the officers planted a kilo of cocaine along his escape route. However, the charges were eventually dismissed due to police misconduct. Later, in the 1980s, cocaine headed for Ross's territory in Cincinnati and was linked back to him. This time, he couldn't dodge the arrest. He was indicted not just in Cincinnati, but also in Los Angeles and Tyler, Texas. Prosecutors estimated that between 1982 and 1989, Ross had resold about 3 tons of cocaine, raking in $900 million. He pled guilty to drug trafficking and got a 10-year prison sentence. He started serving a sentence in 1990, but his time behind bars was cut short. This was thanks to a federal investigation that uncovered massive corruption within the sheriff's office that had been pursuing him. According to Esquire, it turned out that the sheriff's office had been planting evidence, stealing drug money, and even brutally attacking suspects. Ross was given a chance to testify for the government in exchange for a reduced prison sentence, and he took it. Because of this deal, he was released in less than 5 years. Once out, he started getting media attention, and it seemed like people were rooting for him to turn his life around. Even his probation officer said he was like a Robin Hood. He never heard of him getting high, drinking, hitting women, or dealing drugs with kids. He had a reputation for helping people and giving back to the community. But Freeway Rick Ross wouldn't stay free for long. He soon fell into trouble with his former supplier, Blandon, who had secretly become a federal informant after narrowly escaping a life sentence. Blandon told Ross that the Colombians were after him and that he needed money urgently. So Ross agreed to help him out. Later, on March 2, 1995, Ross was caught by the DEA during a drug deal in a parking lot near San Diego. He was later found guilty of conspiring to sell drugs that, ironically, had been supplied by the DEA. Since this was his third felony conviction, he was sentenced to life in prison. Not long after Ross began serving his life sentence, he was visited by investigative journalist Gary Webb. During this visit, Ross learned for the first time about Blandon's connection to the Contras, a rebel group trying to overthrow Nicaragua's socialist government in the 1980s. Webb explained that Blandon had been selling drugs to fund weapons for the Contras. Webb later published the expose Dark Alliance, claiming that the CIA had been funding the Contras, fully aware that these rebels were using crack cocaine sales in Los Angeles to finance their efforts. Ross, who had no idea about Blandon's background, was stunned to realize he might have been a pawn in a much bigger game. This also explained why he had been able to sell drugs for so long without getting caught. Even though things looked bleak for Ross, he decided to make the most of his time in prison by teaching himself to read at age 28. While studying in the prison library, he found a technicality in his case that could reduce his sentence. He discovered that his prior convictions in Texas and Ohio were part of the same federal crime, meaning they should have counted as 1 strike instead of 2. This meant he was technically on his 2nd strike, not his 3rd, and his sentence had to be reduced. His lawyer was doubtful, but Ross was right. His sentence was reduced to 20 years, and he ended up serving just 14. Ross was officially released in 2009, and he's been a free man ever since. Since his release in 2009, Freeway Rick Ross has reinvented himself as an author, actor, prison reform activist, and legal cannabis entrepreneur. He even took legal action against Miami rapper Rick Ross for using his name and identity. After a 3-year battle, the court ruled in favor of the rapper on First Amendment grounds. Despite the legal setback, Rick found success in other areas. He published his book Freeway Rick Ross, The Untold Autobiography, and worked on documentaries like Freeway, Crack in the System. As an entrepreneur, he expanded his ventures to include distributing legal cannabis and other products. While he once believed that selling crack cocaine was his only path to success, the time he spent reading in prison helped him regain a multi-millionaire mindset. Although starting over without the money he made as a kingpin wasn't easy, Ross managed to turn his life around. Ross has also become a motivational speaker, often surprising those who hear him speak. In an interview with Bet, he recalled speaking at a school in Detroit, where the principal was skeptical about his past. But after hearing Ross speak, the principal was so impressed that he told him, "You can come here and do whatever you want." Ross acknowledged that there's still a misconception about people with a drug-dealing past. He said, "Even good people will do bad things when there are no options," emphasizing his desire to show that he wasn't just a mindless criminal, but someone who had been driven to make tough choices. Well, that's all for today. I hope you enjoyed and learned something from the story of our Titan Rick. I'll catch you in the next one.